Ariana's sexual assault in Landman is one of the most disturbing moments the series has delivered so far, not because it's graphic or sensationalized, but because of what it represents and what it echoes. For longtime fans of Taylor Sheridan's work, this storyline feels uncomfortably familiar. It recalls the worst uses of violence in Yellowstone, where trauma is sometimes deployed less as a lived experience and more as a narrative accelerant. In Landman, Ariana's assault risks crossing that same line, turning a deeply serious subject into a device rather than a fully examined reality. The problem isn't that Landman chose to address sexual assault. Stories can and should explore difficult realities when they do so with care, intention, and respect for the characters involved. The issue is how Ariana's assault functions within the narrative. Rather than centering her experience, her fear, her agency, her recovery, the story almost immediately pivots to how the event affects other characters, particularly Cooper. That shift is what makes the storyline feel unsettling in a way that goes beyond the crime itself. This is where the parallels to Yellowstone become hard to ignore. In that series, violence, especially against women, is often used to harden male characters, justify future brutality, or push the plot forward at maximum speed. The emotional aftermath is frequently rushed or sidelined. Ariana's assault risks falling into the same pattern. The focus moves quickly from what happened to her to what Cooper did in response, and then to the legal and corporate fallout of his actions. Ariana becomes the catalyst, not the center. That framing matters. When a show uses sexual violence primarily to motivate another character's arc, it reduces the victim to a narrative tool. Even if the writing doesn't intend to do that, the effect is the same. Ariana's trauma becomes something that exists to justify Cooper's potential jail time, to escalate stakes, and to darken the tone of the season. Her inner world, by comparison, receives far less attention. This approach mirrors some of Yellowstone's most criticized moments, where extreme violence appears suddenly, hits hard, and then recedes without meaningful exploration. The shock lingers, but the story moves on. The audience is left unsettled, not because the show said something profound, but because it didn't say enough. Another troubling echo is how quickly the assault is folded into broader systems of power. Lawyers, executives, and institutions begin circling almost immediately. While this reflects reality in some ways, it also risks overwhelming Ariana's personal experience. Her trauma becomes another problem for the system to manage rather than a human crisis demanding care. This is a familiar Sheridan pattern, systems swallowing individuals whole, but when applied to sexual assault, the effect can feel cold and dismissive. What makes this especially frustrating is that Landman has previously shown restraint and nuance in its character-driven storytelling. The series is strongest when it allows consequences to unfold slowly, when it sits with discomfort instead of rushing past it. Ariana's assault deserved that same patience. Instead, the narrative urgency shifts elsewhere, creating the impression that the event exists mainly to justify subsequent chaos. There's also a tonal issue at play. Landman already struggles in Season 2 with balancing realism, melodrama, and spectacle. Introducing sexual assault into that unstable mix is risky. If the show isn't fully committed to handling the subject with sustained gravity, the result can feel exploitative, even if unintentionally so. The echoes of Yellowstone's worst excesses make this risk feel even more pronounced. Importantly, the problem isn't Ariana as a character. She isn't written weakly or irresponsibly in isolation. The problem is the space the story gives her, or fails to give her, after the assault. Recovery, fear, anger, confusion, and resilience don't resolve neatly, and they shouldn't be rushed. When a show moves on too quickly, it sends an implicit message about whose pain matters most. There's also a gendered imbalance in how consequences are portrayed. Cooper faces immediate, visible danger: arrest, jail time, legal ruin. Ariana faces something far more internal and long-lasting, but the show treats it as less narratively urgent. That imbalance mirrors a broader cultural tendency to prioritize the fallout for men over the lived reality of women who experience violence. Seeing that pattern repeated here is disappointing, especially in a series that otherwise aims to critique power and injustice. This is where Landman's ambition clashes with its execution. The show wants to expose the cruelty of systems, the way institutions chew people up, and the unfairness of consequences. But by not fully centering Ariana, it risks reproducing the very harm it's trying to critique. Trauma becomes another commodity in the narrative economy, something to be traded for tension and momentum. The comparison to Yellowstone is unavoidable because the creative fingerprints are the same. Sheridan's worlds are brutal, and they often use violence to strip away illusion. But when that violence involves sexual assault, the margin for error shrinks dramatically. Shock without sustained reflection doesn't challenge the audience, it numbs them. That said, this storyline isn't beyond repair. Landman still has time to course-correct by giving Ariana the narrative space she deserves. That means slowing down, letting her perspective lead scenes, and acknowledging that what happened to her isn't just a plot point, it's a life-altering event. It also means resisting the urge to let the legal and corporate drama completely overshadow her healing and autonomy. If the show fails to do that, Ariana's assault will stand as one of Landman's most troubling missteps, not because it portrayed violence, but because it echoed the worst habits of Yellowstone without learning from the backlash those choices generated. Stories about power, consequence, and injustice don't require sexual violence to be meaningful. When they choose to include it, the responsibility is enormous. Right now, Landman walks a dangerous line, one where Ariana risks becoming remembered not as a character with depth and agency, but as the moment the show repeated a mistake it should have already outgrown. Whether Landman ultimately handles the storyline with the care it demands will say a lot about what kind of series it wants to be going forward. Because using trauma to raise stakes is easy. Honoring it with patience, empathy, and focus is much harder, and far more important.